It's that time of the week again. We're doing some Wednesday morning fantasy football lineup advice. This time around, talking some week 2 games here, leaving week 1 in the past, and now moving on to what's in front of us here for week 2. We've got a phenomenal kickoff here on Thursday night with the Chiefs and the Chargers, and a whole lot of good games on Sunday and Monday to follow. So make sure to get zoned in for those games. We're going to have another awesome week here for fantasy football. In this video, I'll be covering 5 must-start wide receivers for 2022 Week 2 action. I'm super pumped about this week's games, and we're continuing to put out a ton of new content and information. We dropped 4 videos yesterday here on YouTube, and we're getting stuff out on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube Shorts as well. Our website, we're publishing articles now for in-season lineup advice, so go check out all that stuff. Those articles can be found on sizzlefantasy.com, and the link is in the description of today's video. So go check all that stuff out as you're watching today's video, you guys. So much stuff for you to consume and take advantage of here for week 2. Let's get into the video, though. I can't even begin to tell you guys how much fun I had in week 1 breaking those games down for you all and trying to help you guys get those dubs in your leagues. We're going to do the same thing here in week 2, and we're kicking off today's episode with JuJu Smith-Schuster of the Kansas City Chiefs taking on the Los Angeles Chargers at home. And a PSA for those of you out there, go set your lineups right now. If you're watching this on Wednesday or Thursday, there's still time. JuJu plays in that Thursday night opener. That's why I referenced that in the intro of today's video. So make sure you don't miss the opportunity and have him, sealed out on your bench and out of those fantasy lineups. But for me, JuJu Smith-Schuster is someone that knocked my socks off, utterly impressed me last week, and I am super, super excited about going forward here this season. I'm even more excited about his ADP from this summer in hindsight than I was at the time, and he is a player who I had as a must-draft asset. He completely, like I said, wowed me in that week 1 contest against the Arizona Cardinals. He absolutely balled out in the first half of that game, having 8 targets, hauling in 6 of them, so a 75% catch rate there, and accruing 79 yards receiving. And again, what was a very, very impressive usage, and he showed me he fits right into this Kansas City Chiefs offense, and clearly playing with the best quarterback in the game, or one of the 3 best quarterbacks in the game in Patrick Mahomes. I don't really care what your opinion is. I mean, I'm not going to give it here for today's episode in terms of quarterback hierarchy and rankings, but the point being, he's got a dang good player throwing him the football, and that obviously can help him create some extra yardage and make some big plays that just plain and simple, some other quarterbacks, aka Big Ben, and JuJu's end run with the Pittsburgh Steelers here, the first 5 years of his NFL career. You're now on to bigger and better things here. So again, like I wanted to talk about, he balled out in week 1, had a 75% catch rate, had that really nice accrual of yardage through the air, and showed me that he is clearly at this point in time the top receiving target for Patrick Mahomes, not named Travis Kelce, but the top dog in that wide receiver room for this team. This is a player that fits really well into either a boundary and perimeter role, or a guy that can kick down into the slot and run some routes in that phase of things. I really like how they got him the ball quickly and in space in this past week's game. He did have an unfortunate fumble that knocked his point totals down a little bit here, but I think that as he continues to get more accustomed and incorporate into things here, it's really been a while since JuJu's had the ball in his hands a high level of times. Big Ben Roethlisberger's final 2 years left a lot to be desired for JuJu. He had some injury struggles as well. So in this matchup against the Chargers, we saw Derek Carr have his way with his top receiver this past week. Devontae Adams had 141 yards and a touchdown. I'm not expecting those type of numbers from JuJu Smith-Schuster here in week 2, but I'm expecting really, really solid wide receiver 2 level numbers. J.C. Jackson is still kind of iffy for this game. It's a short week for LAC, so we may not see him out there, and I really question whether or not he's going to shadow in this contest. If he did, I don't know if JuJu is necessarily someone that really warrants that type of respect from an opposing defense after just 1 week. So I think the Chiefs will align him in unique ways. Andy Reid will put him in motion. He'll get creative with his offensive scheme here and facilitate the football to JuJu Smith-Schuster for a second consecutive week. He had a very quiet second half this past contest, but the Chiefs had a stranglehold on the Arizona Cardinals, completely blew them out of the water, extended their lead in the second half of that game, and things didn't really start to come back until the Cardinals scored 2 late touchdowns. So I really like the Chiefs in this matchup, really like JuJu Smith-Schuster. Obviously, we like Travis Kelce every single week in that offense, but I think JuJu is the established wide receiver 1 for that football team today. Next up here, I'm going Julio Jones of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tom Brady already having his receiver core shake up. Some more injuries for Tampa Bay and Sunday Night Football, notably Chris Godwin, who had a very, very speedy recovery from his ACL injury a season ago, actually aggravated his hamstring and was forced to leave that contest and was very quickly ruled out. So it sounds like he's going to miss a few games here. That automatically knocks Julio Jones up one spot on the depth chart here. And for a guy who had some really nice usage in a first contest with Tom Brady, I think that role could expand here. This is a player who in week 1 against Dallas only had a 52% snap share in this offense. But again, I'm expecting that number to rise here as he continues to get acclimated to this offensive system. And obviously, there's now a greater dependency on him to move the football downfield for this football team. He caught 3 of his 5 targets, so a 60% catch rate in week 1 for 69 yards. Notably, he had a really, really nice catch down the right sideline on a deep ball from TB12. That was very impressive. If you haven't heard it already, Julio actually clocked the fastest straight line speed time of anyone in the Tampa Bay roster. So clearly still someone that possesses some athleticism and game-breaking speed. That'll be big as a field-stretching asset. Obviously, Tom would like to get him the ball underneath and in short yardage situations, but Julio is more of a big play guy. We did actually see Julio take 2 rushing attempts this past week for 17 yards. That was also something interesting, just seeing this offense and Byron Leftwich trying to get the football into his hands in unique ways and get him different opportunities to touch the rock. So they're going to need to do that this week against New Orleans. The good news, Marshawn Lattimore, the cornerback for the Saints, the top player for that defensive secondary, does shadow. However, the shadowing assignment I'm expecting to see here is against Mike Evans, leaving Julio Jones to work against secondary coverage and potentially have a little bit more to feast on the opposite side of the formation. So final note here on Julio, Russell Gage, his other competition for target, another guy who could be in for a bigger role in this offense, played just 42% of snaps this past week, so 10% fewer than Julio Jones, obviously favoring and giving the advantage in that category to Julio, and Russell just had 2 targets in that Sunday night contest, despite the fact that Chris Godwin was out for about 3/4 of that game. So liking what I'm seeing here from Julio Jones. I think this gives him a definite spike in rankings here for the next foreseeable future until Chris Godwin's back on the field. The one concern and issue with this matchup that could create a bust situation is that Tom Brady has really struggled against the Saints. For whatever reason, Dennis Allen's had his number. It is a similar situation to a struggling game we've seen in the past where, Julio Jones is a veteran and proven wide receiver, as is Russell Gage, as is Mike Evans. But in the past, when an undermanned Tampa Bay receiver core faces up against this physical Saints secondary, we've seen the Saints grab and punch and hit receivers off the line of scrimmage, really jam them. In particular, Tyler Johnson and Scotty Miller used to really struggle with this. Tyler Johnson's no longer in town, but in those situations, if the Saints are able to mess up the timing of the plays here in Tampa, that could throw Tom for a loop and continue to see struggles in this matchup. But we're hoping because of the veteran acquisitions at the wide receiver position, the savviness, they'll be able to keep that tempo and timing down on their routes and be able to make some big plays here. Christian Kirk taking on the Colts this week is my 3rd must-start player. This is a guy, I apologize, I still don't have Christian Kirk in an official Jags uniform. There just hasn't been any good pictures released yet. But Christian Kirk is a guy who really, really impressed me here in week 1, corralling 6 of his 12 targets for 117 yards. No touchdowns, but that's obviously something we're expecting to see eventually factor into a situation here. I think that in week 1, what Kirk also really showed me is that he has a clear stranglehold on the number 1 wide receiver position for this Jacksonville offense. It's my belief that if he continues to be utilized this much out of the slot for Trevor Lawrence, he's going to have a massive target share this season. He's going to have a high volume of opportunities to produce each week, and he's going to be that safety blanket for Trevor Lawrence. And I really liked what I saw Doug Peterson do with Christian Kirk in week 1, moving him around in motion, getting him in action before the snap, and obviously motioning him across the line of scrimmage. So lots of encouraging things to see in this situation. This is a Colts defense last week that was a little bit more malleable than expected. The one concern here is that the Indianapolis Colts do have a very solid slot cornerback in Kenny Moore. However, when I watched some tape from the Texans game this past week, I did notice Brandon Cooks aligning in the slot every once in a while. He is primarily a boundary wide receiver, but he did have a couple of nice plays out of the slot. Moore's also not someone that necessarily, scares me to the extent of totally shutting down a receiver, and especially with Christian Kirk's role as the top dog in this receiving offense. That's something I think is a very favorable situation. Cooks last week had 7 receptions for 82 yards again, some of those plays coming out of the slot. Another thing I wanted to mention is if you think back to last season, Las Vegas Raiders, 2 very different players in Christian Kirk and Hunter Renfrow, but Hunter Renfrow was able to produce a very nice stat line in this matchup, even find himself an end zone trip because of the fact that he was the number 1 receiver for the Raiders offense a season ago. So with volume and opportunities comes production here. You've got good enough quarterback play in Trevor Lawrence. He did struggle a bit in week 1, but I think things take a turn for the positive here in week 2, and hopefully in another divisional matchup 2 weeks in a row, he's able to continue providing and producing for a player that I think he has a very, very good connection with here with the Jacksonville organization. Before we dive into DJ Moore here, if you guys are looking for some more in-depth fantasy football content, make sure to check out sizzlefantasy.com and our different memberships on that platform. You can get access to myself and my private messages on the community Discord server to ask me questions about your lineups, trade scenarios, anything fantasy football. You can message me 24/7. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. And for those of you who are already on the SFS Gold platform or the All Access Pass membership, I'm sure you guys can attest to my responsiveness and ability to get you guys answers to your questions in a timely manner. So go check that stuff out on sizzlefantasy.com. The link is in the description of today's video, or check out the QR code. Just give her a scan with your phone camera. It'll take you right to the page you need to be at. We also just wrote an article on the San Francisco 49ers backfield, so go check all that great stuff out here. DJ Moore is our 4th must-start wide receiver here for week 2 action, taking on the New York Giants this week. The thing I wanted to note here, and the reason we're talking about DJ Moore, a player who primarily would be a lineup option, a top 24 wide receiver 2 every single week. We're really just chatting through him here because of the fact that he did have a bust game in week 1. It was very shocking, especially because of the fact he was out-targeted by a Robbie Anderson, who we think of as a far inferior player to DJ Moore. Basically, my message here is to stay patient, don't panic. Like I talked about throughout the offseason, Baker Mayfield is not, the dream quarterback that you were just waiting for DJ Moore to finally have in this offensive situation. But what he is still an improvement over Sam Darnold, PJ Walker, Teddy Bridgewater. He was, after all, able to produce a very favorable stat line for Robbie Anderson at the end of last week. But the other thing I did want to note here is that Robbie Anderson finished last game with 102 receiving yards on 5 receptions. 75 yards of that came in 1 play. So you're talking about a receiver who in 4 other catches produced just 27 yards. That's not even 8 yards per reception. So DJ, again, is clearly the alpha wide receiver 1. He is clearly the most talented player in this offense. We kind of saw this struggling dynamic with Teddy Bridgewater back in, 2020 or 2019. But at the end of the day, DJ Moore, I'm expecting his talent to prevail here. I'm expecting in a matchup against the Giants secondary, which allowed 3 Titans wide receivers to go above 55 yards receiving. I'm expecting that target share to swing back in favor of DJ Moore, really allow him to establish himself as the top pass-catching option in that wide receiver core, and obviously get back to those ridiculous target share numbers like he had it in 2021, with 162 of them heading his direction last year, having north of a 28% target share, and being a safe weekly wide receiver 2. He will have his ebbs and flows throughout the season. It's not a flawless situation here, but I do have confidence in Moore's ability to bounce back here for this week 2 matchup, especially considering what Titans wide receivers, who play a much different style of offensive football, but also aren't this air raid attack of an offensive football team. They're more of a ground and pound play action team. They were still able to find a large majority of success in that contest. So finally here, the last name I want to talk through in today's video. The reason I like Elijah Moore in this matchup is because of the fact that he had a very under the radar week 1 performance. He actually had some what we call missing fantasy points left on the table. What those are essentially are plays that nearly resulted in a large production, like, a 50-yard pass downfield that was called back for a penalty, a touchdown that, he got 1 3/4 feet inbounds, and he had some feet on the white chalk, so they ultimately wave off that score. We saw, for example, Jamar Chase have that issue, or another example is Travis Etienne this past week having 2 touchdown passes lost. One was sailed over his head wide open by Trevor Lawrence. The other was a walk-in 5-yard touchdown scamper that he just simply dropped. Elijah Moore had a touchdown reception called back due to offensive pass interference. So, again, under the radar performance, still looked very, very good. Still is one of the best slot, at least young slot route runners in the game today. It has very, very good athleticism to go on top of that. I like this role a lot here against the Browns, and the reason I liked him last week against the Baltimore Ravens is that in matchups where the Jets are the inferior team, which of course they are again this week with Joe Flacco, you need to get the ball out of your hands very quickly. This is an offensive line that's not equipped to pass block Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney this week. They weren't equipped to block Baltimore's pass rush last week. They're going to have to get that thing out quick. That means a lot of slot receptions and targets for Elijah Moore. That means a lot of opportunity out of the backfield for Michael Carter. And I really like how that can start to progress itself into a point where I can evaluate him as a solid flex or maybe even a low-end wide receiver 2 play this week. I do think in PPR formats, if that volume starts to rack up here, you could see a really nice floor performance. And of course, if he does find the end zone, maybe play and toy with a little bit of ceiling potential as well here. So, a couple things to note on Moore. Joe Flacco threw the football 59 times last week. If that somehow progresses and continues here, even if he goes north of like 40, 45 passing attempts, you're going to have plenty of opportunity to work with here. We did see Garrett Wilson have a couple nice catches a week ago. We saw Tyler Conklin score a receiving touchdown. So right now, they're just kind of really trying to find their identity passing the football offensively. But Joe Flacco, the veteran player, did show some connection with Moore in spots when he played last season. And I think that they can continue to build upon that here in week 2 again, because he's going to have to get the football out of his hands quickly. The slot receiver position is able to get off the ball a bit quicker and ultimately get out of the route break closer to the line of scrimmage if they so choose to call that type of a route tree. So I love Elijah Moore here. He's a phenomenal player. I like the outlook for this week's games. And those are our 5 must-start wide receivers for week 2 action. Of course, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Who are you starting? Who are you sitting this week? What questions do you have for me? Of course, this is always an open space for you guys to voice your fantasy concerns. I'll help you guys out to the best of my ability and respond to as many of you as possible up until game day. I try and check my inbox numerous times throughout the day on YouTube, so whenever I see something pop up in there, I'm responding to your guys' questions. Again, before we head on out, make sure to check out some of the other lineup advice videos we've got for today. We're posting multiple YouTube videos per day here. We've also got, trade advice already out for the week, waiver wire stuff if you're behind the ball a little bit and need to check out some names still out there for your teams, and a bunch of other great stuff. Also, check out Underdog Fantasy for this week. We were talking through some ways to get me as your personal fantasy advisor for this year. You can simply just go on there, sign up using code SFS, and deposit $10 or more. You'll get all your money to keep and play with, and it's a thank you for using my code and letting them know that I sent you over to their platform. I'll hook you up with my in-season lineup advice and weekly positional lineup rankings for free as a toss-in. I talk to them every single day there at Underdog, and I will get notified ASAP within 24 hours and get your account hooked up so you can access all of your exclusive information. So go check all that stuff out again. Check out the links in the description, our social media accounts here. We're trying to grow the TikTok platform, of course, Twitter as well. Every once in a while, I'll drop a random tidbit that just doesn't make it into an episode on Twitter, so make sure you're following me on that space. I'll drop randomly, hey, I'm buying this player this week, and if he didn't make it into a buy video for the week, obviously some stuff you might want to pick up on. So go check out some of those other videos, links in the description, a ton of stuff to consume here, and of course, don't forget those questions. I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.